I can't wait for this conversation. Welcome to the Common Sense Show. And we have a special guest today that I think is one of the smartest people that I've met. And I like his passion, his enthusiasm, his energy. He is Billy Hofacker, and we're going to talk to him about his business, about his podcast, about his philosophy on finances, especially when it comes to, in general, finances, but also specifically as it relates to the fitness industry. This was a great conversation I had with him. But first, I'm Micah Logan. This is the Common Sense Show. Welcome to the Common Sense Show. And I like to just introduce you to Billy Hofacker, who is probably the man in finances in the fitness industry. Billy is the owner of Total Body Bootcamp and Performance Center on Long Island. He has a couple of Long Island, New York. He has a couple of locations there, founder and owner of those. Billy's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, so don't mess with him, where he'll lock you up. You ever see like a tarantula eat like another bug? Like that's Billy right there. He'll lock you up just like that. He's also the author of a book that's coming out soon called Fitness Profits, A Simple Path to Financial Freedom. And more than that, he's a brain. He thinks, and that's important to me more so than anything else. Billy, welcome to the Common Sense Show.
Man, Mike, I appreciate that intro. That was humbling, and I'm excited for our conversation as well. I feel like, not to be a creep, but I feel like we're like best friends. I mean, this is the third. I missed you last week. We talked 2 prior weeks, and then last week we missed. So this is 3 out of the 4 weeks we're having a conversation. So I feel blessed to be on the show.
We just have to create a time to talk every week moving forward after this. Yeah. But I was on your podcast recently. We had a really in-depth conversation about a lot of things. We spanned a lot of topics. And Billy, I forgot to mention that you are a father of 3 or 4.
So I have 3 girls and a almost 1-year-old boy. So he's the youngest, 4 total.
So you are a busy man.
Yes, sir.
And you and your wife have your hands full at the moment. Your oldest is 11.
She actually should know this without thinking about it. She just turned 10.
It's the same thing, man. When you get caught up in the vortex of life, that's kind of how it goes. But yeah. So Billy, you know, when you and I spoke previously, we talked about a bunch of things. We primarily focused on finances and and philosophy, basically. But I wanted to just have everyone be introduced to how you even got acquainted with the personal finance game, and essentially what your strategy is on a high level, and then we can kind of break it down from there.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think we might have touched on this a little bit when we talked. There's a lot of really cool catchphrases for this stuff, like how your pain becomes your purpose and all that stuff. And it's definitely an example of that. So right off the bat, I just encourage people to kind of embrace that, right? Life happens. We all have a story. It happens for a reason. And out of that, we can, sorry, Micah, it looks like my mic changed. Okay, we're good now. Sorry about that. So out of that, comes our purpose, which I think is like actually happening to me
Right.
in the process of that happening. And it goes back. It goes back a long time, but without going too far back, I found myself at age. One thing I'm terrible at is like exact times and ages and stuff like that. But I'm pretty sure I was 30 years old, and I thought I was doing great, and I was in a lot of ways. Right, it's not like things aren't isolated, right? We have all the different areas of our lives, and if you follow Zig Ziglar, he's got the wheel of life in different areas. So
Right.
I thought I was doing pretty well. And one day I was getting ready for work. It was 7 something in the morning. And by the way, I was married to my wonderful wife, Melissa, and we were like right at the point where we were about to start a family. So life was exciting. I had a good horizon when I hear a knock on the door, and opened it, and there's this big muscular dude standing there, the thick goatee, a shaved head, and tattoos all over his neck and everything. And I was confused, of course, until I looked past him and I saw my brand new Rolls Royce. I'm kidding. I saw my brand new white Honda Accord hooked up to his tow truck. my
Wow.
car was being repossessed, and it was such a strange feeling. I was just shocked more than anything. I didn't.
Mhm.
You would think. I don't know if anybody's who's listening has been in that situation. Some people had it worse. I know people who's lost their homes, and we almost did as well. But you would think that something like that wouldn't be a shock,
Mhm.
because I remember being judgmental towards people, even about different things. How could you not realize that you're headed for danger and you're in trouble? But I honestly didn't. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know what the heck was going on, but I just didn't have the awareness. I swept plenty of things under the carpet, and this was the result. So that's, to answer your question, like how I got started on the financial journey. That was the very start of it, which led to some pain. And I know we're going to talk about much more, but I will say that I can't hide this. I mean, you'll hear it, and everybody will hear it. Like I get so lit up, I guess, about
Mhm.
personal finance. I think it's such an interesting topic, and I think it's so interesting partly because it affects so many different areas. I didn't realize the negative effects it would have on my marriage, and every area. I don't know that there's one area that finances don't touch. Everything from spiritual to family, all the different areas, even fitness, right? If you're
Yeah.
constantly stressed out about finances, you're probably not going to be as healthy as you can.
Yeah. And so, so you had, it's safe to assume, like some cognitive dissonance around your personal finances at the beginning. Like you like, on one hand, you're like, well, how could this happen to me? On the other hand, it's like, that in order to get to a repossession, there has to be missed payments. Right. And so,
Yeah.
like, how do we get to the point, do you think, that we just surprise ourselves and just overlook the natural state of being, like paying a bill that is required because you need to use this car for this, that, and the other? Like like what is going on, do you think, in people's lives? Or maybe you can speak for yourself, like where you just kind of miss that.
Man, this is already like an amazing therapy session, because these questions are so important. I encourage people to ask these questions to themselves. And if I could think back, I'm sure it had to do with different issues that I had, different things that I learned about money and how to relate to money. There's just these things that were never addressed. And I know a lot of times, as fitness professionals, we talk about the importance of our mindset and uncovering those, some people call them like, iceberg beliefs, or, those deep rooted beliefs that we have that cause us to make certain decisions. And, for those reasons, I just completely ignored this area that I would learn would be so important. And it's hard. I mean, that's kind of like a simpler answer. It's the reason why I ignored it is because it's hard and it's painful. I'd rather focus on the fact that I'm training clients. I love what I do. I'm making a difference in their lives. I got this new wife. I got all these things that are really great. It's a lot easier to focus on those things than it is to focus on the fact that I screwed up. I have to look in the mirror and face the fact that nobody forced me to not make my car payments. And what was partly interesting, I think, was that I don't think I fit the typical person that would have happened to, which I think in a lot of ways also helped me, because I work with a lot of people now, and some of them have really they have a lot of work to do when it comes to like their spending patterns and their relationship in terms of looking to fulfill certain needs or desires with spending. Mine was a little bit more masked than that. I didn't have like a lot of fancy things. I wasn't, I didn't think I was looking to impress people with material things. It was just, I was good. I was a saver before that when I was younger, and just started off with that one decision to borrow some money, and then before you know it, I'm $130,000 in non-mortgage debt, and it's like death by a thousand cuts.
It's it is true that the lifestyle creep that happens, and is written about in a lot of financial books, that the more you earn, or the more you are able to generate with cash, that your lifestyle changes. And it changes in many good ways, but there are also ways and habits that are also formed poorly if you don't take a 30,000 foot view of your life. And one of the things I take from you is that it's such a good admission that it was hard, because so many people today always feel like there's always another day to do it. There's always another opportunity for business. You can always generate money. But, you know, eventually you look up and then a decade has passed. And then it's like, okay, well, there's a decade of me saying that I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. But it never actually comes. So at what point did you feel the need to draw a line in the sand personally and just say, you know, look, this is not going to work? What was the catalyst for change?
So I would say when you made that comment, it made me think of something I originally read it. It was Ramit Sethi, who's one of the financial authors that I've read some, and he said it, which I couldn't agree more, which was I went from being 25 years old and thinking I had forever to being however old, 40, 45, and realizing that, wow, I don't have that much time. I gotta really get it together. So for me, and I'm a big believer that at any point in life, you can make a positive change. You could be, I have a client who's in her late 60s and she's, turning things around financially and making decisions and doing really well. So you can always move forward. In my case, if there was one, I was in a really tough spot. Most of the people that even come to me for help are not in a position like I was. They're usually a little bit better off.
Right.
And I was 30 years old. And I do remember really looking at everything. I stopped, I pulled my head out of the sand and I started looking at our reality. And I started putting everything together, started pulling out all the bills, and I started getting more organized. And it was weird because you would think that I would get totally overwhelmed and maybe want to quit. And that's what I'm sure a lot of people would do. But in a lot of ways, it excited me because I looked at it and it's like I knew what I was facing. I was like, okay, like that's what we have to deal with. Make a plan and, game on. And I remember clearly thinking that I'm going to get older, God willing, either way. And I'm 30 years old and I'm going to be 40 one day. And I could either ignore this and who knows where I'd wind up. I don't even want to think about where I would have wound up had I not addressed that, or I could make a positive change starting now. And that's what I chose. I'm thankful for that. But that was definitely an important part to that.
Part of the fear, I think, and you can tell me what you think about this, is fear of the unknown, right? So like oftentimes a person doesn't address things because they don't really know what's on the other side of that fear. What are they really going to discover? How bad really am I? I should have known better. Why didn't I do better kind of deal? And so there's this whole, I fear where I may be, therefore I'm not going to do anything about my situation, because if it's the whole, I'm not going to go to the doctor visit because if I get a scan, it's going to be cancer, right? Kind of fear that people have, which is why they don't go to the doctor. So, but you actually, are you saying that there was like the reverse thing? Like you felt empowered. So the more you understood, the more powerful you felt to change your situation.
Yeah, 100%. And then like I've gone through that, I've gone through that quite a bit, more than I'd like to admit, even more recently of like, man, like where could I have been had I started when I was 20, and it seems like everybody feels that way. I've had 23-year-olds tell me they wish they started earlier. So I think
I say the same thing. I said, if I had my brain now, like 15 years ago, where could I be today? Right. But that's not how life works.
No, exactly. So yeah, I think in my case, it did do that. And even now, like I just realized that there's so much that I don't know, and there's so much to learn, and it's exciting to me. It's like a game, right? It's like, what else can I learn? How can I improve? And that was definitely true with me. I think part of the problem was, and like it is for so many, was not having that education, not understanding how things work, not understanding the why behind it. What is compound interest? Why is it so detrimental, or could it be so? And how can it be so beneficial? All those things I didn't have a good grasp on, and I started learning, and my eyes were opened, and it was transformative.
How did you get buy-in from your wife to go along with this plan? Because obviously, it's like it's easy to hide stuff, and I'm not saying that you did, but like it's easy for people to hide stuff when there's time before the tow truck comes and is out in front of your house with the tattoo guy sitting on the porch. But then you can't hide it when he's actually sitting on your porch asking for your keys. So how did you kind of help nurture your relationship and get your wife on the same page with an action plan?
So a couple of things come to mind. Number one, I'll just start by saying that I feel really fortunate to have the wife that I do, because I think that's a part of it, right? That's something I can't necessarily control is her reaction. That's number one. Number two, I was, ashamed is a strong word, but I was really embarrassed of, my part and how we got to that point.
Mhm.
And I made a lot of mistakes. So I wish I could say that everything was perfect. I talked to her and
Right.
we were like perfectly on the same page and we started working together. There was a lot of, arguments and,
Right.
and difficult conversations that we had and still have. But
Sure.
early on, it was very difficult. It was hard on our marriage. Just remember sitting there with stacks and stacks of bills, trying to work through it. And she has
Mhm.
all of her own fears and insecurities that she was dealing with.
Right.
But I think one of the things that helped us, and I really recommend it, and I recommend this to my clients as well, is it is so powerful when a couple gets on the same page and they're swimming in the same direction.
Mm.
Because I have people where when this person's got his money and she has her money, and it just doesn't work as well. So us being on the same page, being together in it, we're gonna get through this together, and really looking forward and looking at that vision. That was a big part of our process, was
Mhm.
where do we want to be, and talking about it, and talking about, not just about what I want, but what do we both want? What did she
Right.
want? What are her hopes and dreams? And thankfully, in a lot of ways, we're living out that vision that we had for ourselves back then. And we wouldn't have been able to do that if we weren't both on the same page.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And if you're listening to this podcast, like this is real life. Um, I think what Billy's talking about here, which is basically that, you may not be on the same page. Like it may not just flip a switch and all of a sudden your wife's like, oh, that was a little frustrating. But let's work together now to figure out, like, she may be like, okay, I have to get out of here because this guy is not going to lead me in the direction that I want to go with my life as well. And that's a real conversation that you have to have. And fortunately, it worked out for you. And as you said, fortunately, she's the kind of woman that she is who she is, and
Mhm.
she stuck by you, and like, look where you are now. But let's not gloss over the fact that you eliminated over $130,000 in debt, and you did
Mhm.
so with positive actions. I always say to people, I'm like, they ask me like, well, what do you do when you feel negative? I'm like, you simply work on positive things, and by working on positive things, you string them together, then you can change the balance of that negativity. And it seems like that's what you did. That getting those bills and just working towards it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was 5 years. It took 5 years. In 5 years, I don't know how that sounds. It might sound really quick. It might sound like a long time. And it's, in some ways it was a really long time. In some ways it flew by.
Right.
But that's what it was. It was really working consistently. One thing that I'm really proud of, is that we talk about the whole, spouse support and things like that. That was now maybe 11 years ago, since
Mm-hmm.
that tow truck situation.
Yep.
And my wife and I have not missed one single month in 11 years of sitting down together. And this is with 4 kids. This is even when she maybe just had a baby or whatever it is. We
Right.
haven't missed 1 month of communicating about our finances. So a meeting, essentially,
Wow.
right? For lack of a better word, we have not
Yep.
missed. So that's one thing I'm really, I'm proud of us for that, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not always easy. I mean, a lot of
Right.
times it's very inconvenient, but that has been, if there's like the signs of success or the things that really help, that's one of the biggest things,
Mm-hmm.
that we just never missed, and we've both been committed to that.
That's awesome. So that truly means that you're on the same page, because
Mm-hmm.
it means that your priorities have shifted from wherever they were at the time, and in shame and things to realism and kind of what you actually want to accomplish. And so it's time to get into the nuts and bolts of this.
Yeah.
So how in the world does one pay down $130,000 in debt? Like, what do they do to get there? It seems insurmountable. I only make $50,000. I only make 45,000. I only make 60 or 70. Like, how do I even tackle this?
Yeah. A lot of people, when they think of it, they think it's like all about income.
Yep.
And I would say that's not the first place that somebody should start. And that's not where we started. I was actually making less money when, because I was also like in the process of starting a business. So my
Right.
business just celebrated 10 years when COVID started.
Right.
So it was
Right.
actually
Yeah.
February of 2020. So now we're past 11 years. So we're also in the process of starting a business. So there was a lot of stress to think about that, all that
Mhm.
debt, new business. I left
Mhm.
my job. she left her job actually as well, and that's a whole nother story. She switched jobs.
Right.
Eventually left all employment, but we were we were making less household income when we started getting out of debt than we were making when we got into it. So to me, that's like proof that that's not what it's about. That's not that's important. You're obviously going to be able to make more progress with more money,
Right.
but that's not the first place to start. So and how we did it, it's gonna sound like super non-sexy, but it was like one penny at a time, and it sounds crazy, but I remember things like taking like $1.20 and like putting it towards a debt. And you might think like, how would that make a difference? How would $1.20 make a difference when you have, all that debt? And I'm telling you, from somebody who's been through it, it does. It's just that habit, and it's becoming that type of person. The identity changes. We were on a path. We were super intense about it. We made a lot of sacrifices, but in hindsight, I mean, they weren't like that bad. Like one thing we did was we decided to share one car rather than have two cars. So yeah, it was a little bit inconvenient. Right. We didn't go on any vacations outside of really low cost things like, staying at home or going somewhere local. We didn't do anything fancy, and it was fine. It was like, I don't feel, I even to this day, I don't feel like, oh man, I wish we would have went somewhere, fancy during those 5 years. It was fine. It was kind of like, it was kind of exciting. So, I know it's a super vague answer, but we did it just one step at a time.
Well, we can break that down even further. Honestly, they say that changing a habit is equated in the same place in your brain as torture. And so the reason why changing a habit is so hard is not just because you are used to doing something. The physical act of changing how you think or behave with a specific issue is torturous. It's the feeling behind changing is something different, something that's odd. So it's not just an insurmountable debt that gets people frozen. It's also the process of having to change their habits to tackle the debt that actually hurts. And so, what I found interesting about that $1.20, it's like what you were doing was more establishing who you would eventually become versus how much money you were putting on a debt. I mean, it could have been $5 or whatever, but like the point is that you were changing who you are to accommodate, your future goals. And it was just it was almost like a symbol that you are changing what your priorities are.
Yep. And we still do stuff like that. There's still little things that we do that probably don't really matter in terms of like the act of itself. But just little things like saving the extra change and not just blowing it, just little things like that. But one point I want to mention is because I was talking, I had somebody on my podcast, they were like a mindset expert on changing mind and habits. And we were talking and the point came up for me that it was kind of like the moment. So I don't know if this needs to happen for everybody, but it was like the whole thing with the car repossession and digging into our finances to discover where we really were. There was like something that shifted in me. And I said, that's it. Like I had enough. I am going in a different direction. And it was a very clear mind. So I think if there's anything good about the position we got into, it was that it just caused me to really get fed up and make that change. It's like rock bottom or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Like when you're, like you said, like sinking to the bottom of the water, you can, it's easier to spring back up to the surface once you have both feet on the ground and you can kind of move in the opposite direction. And so did your viewpoint on debt change because of how much debt you were in?
It did. So now I'm a no debt guy, which means, hopefully I'll stick to this. And I think about it all the time because I have
that's a Dave Ramsey proposition right there.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started this, I was very much, it's very similar to Dave in terms of like, his philosophies. I've shifted a little bit on certain things. And that's one of the things where I think it has to do with the person, like the whole credit card thing. Like I actually follow the principle of I don't have a credit card. Like I have two gyms. I have, all the personal stuff, but I literally don't have a credit card. I just don't use them. I use cash or I use a debit card. Right. And I could listen to all the arguments in the world. Like, hey, I just went to Hawaii because of my credit card points. And yeah, I can argue back and say, yeah, but how much extra did you spend because you were using those credit cards? Because there is research behind that. But more importantly, it's a personal thing. Like I know what that got me into. And now, you could argue like, hey, you're out of debt, you're doing well, so you can borrow money and you could invest it at a higher rate of return than you'd be paying. And I get all that, like, on paper. But there's it's more of a peace of mind deal for me. So for that reason, I'm pretty averse to debt.
So do you feel like have you become more closed-minded when it comes to that stuff? Do you feel like you're still working on that piece? Like, do you feel like you'll get there? Or do you feel like you're in transition still with that? Or do you feel like I guess what I'm saying is, are you kind of like, okay, so this worked for me, I'm going to stick with this, versus like, let me evolve and see, like, is there a way for me to even earn at a higher, like you just said, like a higher rate of return? Could I actually potentially be missing something with points cards because I have to spend 150,000 anyway? And so if I have to spend 150,000, why not spend 150,000 and get the points at zero interest? Like, where's your mindset with that?
Man,
piece?
that's such a good question. I think, like, right now, the way I'm feeling about that is, in some ways, I'm a little stubborn about it. And it's like, man, this worked for me. And even after I got out of debt, I've made really good progress financially. And yeah, it's a little bit slower of a process because yes, I'm missing out potentially on some of the rewards, but I'm also lowering my risk. And I'm a big believer in margin in finances and in other areas. So the more margin I can create in my life, that might make up for the time lost with not borrowing money. So now hopefully I'll be in such a great position that I'll be able to capitalize on really great opportunities because I have that margin in my life from a time standpoint, from a cash standpoint. Whereas, I see people that are constantly trying to leverage themselves. And yeah, I know I have like good friends that leverage real estate and they do really well.
Right. Yeah.
And I just don't know if that's for everybody.
Right,
you have to be, you have to really be on top of things. You have to be able to deal with the risk and they do, and there's different ways to mitigate that. Maybe it's like acknowledging my shortfall and it's like, hey, I know what I got into before with this. So now if I start playing that game of this is good debt, but this is bad debt, I can get myself into a little trouble. With that said, I realize for many people who weren't in $130,000 of non-mortgage debt, they see it differently, and there's different paths for different people.
It's funny because I read a research. This is different, but driving home your point, like they say that people who see food as good or bad tend to weigh more than people who just eat sensibly and moderately. So once you start kind of viewing food as this is good food, this is bad food, then you tend to overconsume things that are healthier and underconsume things that could contribute to your mental health. So there's like that balance between them, which I find interesting. So let's get back to the nuts and bolts, because I want to make it very clear what you did to get out of it.
Yep.
So was this, okay, so we have two kinds of bills in our life. We have fixed bills and variable bills. Fixed bills are bills that don't change. Typically, those are things like your phone bills, your utility, not utility, but your cell phone bills, your rent or mortgage payment typically doesn't change that frequently, depending on what product you have. And then the variable bills, your electricities, your car insurances annually, things like that. So how did you very clearly set a precedent for yourself for when this particular bill comes in, or when that particular bill comes in, I'm going to add more to this, or I'm going to take the money that I have from this and then pay it off? And did you have a strategy, high to low, low to high? Like, what was your game plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So we follow the debt snowball, and then there's different ways to pay down debt. And I generally lean towards that approach. But there are times where, hey, maybe the interest rate is super high, and if the amounts are like small, the debt snowball works well because usually you have the smaller ones that you could just knock out.
Yep.
But it might just depend on the total balance and the interest rate. If you have a couple that are close, but one's a lot higher interest, I'm not against switching that. But I think the point is that you have a plan and you follow that plan. Either plan could work. It's kind of like saying, hey, I could do this diet or this diet, which is going to work. It's like the one that you're going to follow.
So for the people listening, what's the debt snowball?
So the debt snowball, the simplest way to describe it is you would list your debts in order from however you want to do it. Let's say we're starting at the top, right? You're listing starting at the top, and you're doing your highest balance on the top and you're putting them in order, descending order, and the lowest balance would be at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
When I do this now with clients, I also have them put their the other points in there, like the payoff date, the interest rate, and the minimum payment. So the minimum payment would definitely be on that debt snowball list.
Mm-hmm.
And you start with, before we even go there, you got to stop borrowing money, right? Because you don't want to just add to
Right.
the, you don't want to add to the snowball. So step number
Right.
one is stop borrowing money.
Yeah.
Step number two is you have to pay your basic expenses, right? You need your basic
Mm-hmm.
living expenses. You can't not pay your lights, your food, your,
Mm-hmm.
you know, your rent or mortgage, those kinds of things. So you make sure those are covered. Then after that, you would knock out the minimum payments on each of the debts. And with any extra, you would put it towards the lowest one, the debt that's on the bottom. So let's say for argument's sake, let's say it's $100. Let's say you only owe $100 on that last one. You have a $100 balance, but your minimum payment is 30. All right. So you pay all the minimums on the list. You pay the 30 on the bottom. But whatever money you have, it might be 70, and that would knock off the whole debt. Let's say that's the case. You have $70 left after you've spent everything else. You pay that off. Now that is done. That gets crossed off or checked off, or however you want to do that. And then that minimum payment, which in that example was, what did I say, 30, would go towards the next one. So then you'd pay the next minimum plus that 30. And so that's like the gist of it. But then some other points to that are, you also do whatever you can. This is where the income does come in. You evaluate all your expenses, and you know, in our case, we really cut everything that we didn't need. But then from there, it's like, what else can we do? And that's where it becomes a game. And it's like, hey, the kids never use this. Let's sell this and, and sell it for $30, and then put that towards the debt as well. I remember selling a guitar. It's just funny to think, I had all that debt.
That's funny.
And I had a guitar that I hadn't played since I was a kid, and I sold it on, I must have been at that point, maybe Craigslist. And a guy came to my gym and paid me $25 for the guitar. And I took the $25 and I put it towards the next debt. And it was just like, it was just like doing all that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That is actually really good, clear information that people can do. And what I like about that too, is that you've gotten used to paying that minimum payment of that $30. So it's not like you just take that, go to Dave and Buster's with your kids and, start playing, skeeter ball or something like that. Like, you actually are already used to paying that. So then you roll that into the next debt. And you just kind of like forget about the fact that, that debt, instead of forgetting that debt ever existed, you're still treating it as it's still there, and you're applying it to something else. And so now you have more money being put on the next bill. And so it's funny, because what that structure of paying it down does is it eliminates whole debts from your list without having to, because that small debt is going to become bigger if you wait for it to like it, and then like it moves up the list a little bit. So that's an awesome deal.
Yeah, I'll never forget the last one. After we paid off everything, the last one started at, this is no joke, I think it was 60 something. The last debt was 60 something thousand.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, you talk about the snowball building up, like it was sickening to a certain extent, because I'm paying thousands of dollars like towards this huge debt. And I just remember the last payment. The last payment was like, I looked at it probably a few years ago now, but just to kind of just reflect back, and it was like the last payment, I'm just guessing, but it was like $8,000 or $6,000, whatever it was.
Right.
And it was the last payment.
Wow. That's it's amazing. But you had it because you had already been paying everything else off.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so now you clear your debt, and you've been used to paying, I don't know, let's call it $2,000 a month and all these, and paying everything back. Obviously more than that, but like, we're just for the sake of argument.
Yep.
So now where does that money go? Does that go into Ferraris and paying cash for those things? Or is it now time to kind of switch the gears and become $130,000 cash positive?
Yeah, it's really funny, because one of the things I really love to do is, I love to do what you're doing. I love to talk to, interview, listen to other people who have achieved financial success, whether it's climbed out of debt or accumulated a lot of wealth. And oftentimes there are splurges, but oftentimes those habits, you talk about habits being hard to change, it goes the same way when you get into a better position. Like, I was listening to one guy the other day. He got to the point where he had like $4 million, and he was saying how, his next car is still going to be a used car. And it's just kind of like what he did to get him there.
Mhm.
And one of the lines in A Millionaire Next Door, Thomas Stanley,
Love that book.
he says people think that once you're wealthy, you can like stop these habits.
Mhm.
And he gave a great analogy. He said it's like the person who's thin from running saying, I'm thin now, I'm going to stop running. It's like those are the habits that got them there, so they
Right.
keep doing them. Anyway, we did some kind of celebration.
Mhm.
Maybe we went out to dinner to celebrate,
Right.
like being
Yep.
having the debt paid off. And then we stacked up between 3 to 6 months of I call it an unexpected event fund,
Mhm.
because life happens, especially as you start having kids, and pandemics happen, and kids get sick,
Mhm.
and the roof has a problem, and the boiler breaks, right? All these kinds of things. The
Mhm.
transmission blows.
The rat eats the
So
cat, and all this other stuff happens.
exactly. Yeah, so you go from those things being a full-on emergency to them being like a minor annoyance, and we had those scenarios.
Mhm.
I remember we were driving along, and the car broke down, and it was kind of like weird, because like in the past it would have sent us like into like crisis mode. We're just like, okay, we'll just pull it out of the excess that we have. So we did that, and then from there, and we did loosen up a little bit. We started as kind of progress happens, life becomes a little more fun, for lack of a better word. You can start doing more things, and spending more. We actually turned up our giving, so just try to
Mhm.
be more generous when we're able to, as we're able to.
Turn up the heat too during the winter a little bit more, a little higher.
Exactly. But even that, like we're like,
Yeah.
Mom, it's cold. It's like, you know what, put on a sweatshirt. Put on 2 sweatshirts for that.
Sound like my father growing up. It was always like just mildly uncomfortable, like livable in
Uh-huh.
there. It's
Yeah.
like, well, outside is always 30 degrees, so like, here we are at 58 inside. So,
Yeah.
you know,
The one thing I'll say is, I don't know if people listening, they might think like, oh, it sounds like a boring life. And
Mhm.
it's not. It's like I've come to embrace this like life of frugality, and it doesn't mean that you don't enjoy things that you want. That's a big misconception. So being frugal to me, it just means that you're on purpose and you're intentional.
Mhm.
And if you enjoy beautiful trips to the Caribbean,
Yep.
then that's what you do. But you
Right.
just don't like spend or waste money on the things that you really aren't passionate about, or you're just doing them to do them, maybe to impress people, maybe because you think it's the thing to do.
Mhm.
Like in my case, we talked about this. I'm just not a car guy. Like I
Mhm.
really, like, you could give me a really fancy car and I really wouldn't like care. And there's nothing wrong. And I know you are, and
Mhm.
that's cool. Right.
Mhm.
That's what that's the point of, of being individuals, and we get to
Right.
choose what's important to us. So maybe for me, like I'm a huge fan of personal development.
Mm.
So I've spent, thousands upon thousands of dollars to learn and to go to
Mhm.
these events and things like that. And that's something that I'm happy to do. Maybe vacations are similar, right? Because I really value that. But so it
Right.
just depends.
So, how did you change your attitude towards finances in your business? So, personal finances and business finances are similar in that they both require math and talk to kind of face realities. But did your approach to personal finances affect your approach to business finances?
They did, and they're similar. So they're the way I run the financial house at home is similar to how I run the finances at the business. Yeah, like you said, there are differences, but a lot of it is similar. And I think it helped me. It's,
Mhm.
I guess you could argue that it hurt me, right? Because of the whole debt
Right.
thing. But I think it helped me. I think it helped keep me out of trouble. I remember people taking these huge loans to open up gyms and then going under, and who knows what would have happened to me had I done that.
Right.
Where in my case, I saved up the money. I did it on a shoestring budget, and I kind of really valued what I was doing. I was really careful with what I was doing. And even still, it's still
Mhm.
the case. It's like, hey, we're not buying that thing unless we need it. If that's not
Right.
going to add to the experience of the client,
Mhm.
then I'm not doing it. It's just not worth it, right? That money can go somewhere else.
There's way too many fitness operators out there that buy equipment that they never use,
Absolutely.
and they just kill like $5,000, and which they could have spent on something else.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about why you decided to write the book, Financial Profits,
It all started,
Fitness Profits. Sorry.
yeah. Yeah, fitness profits. It all started by I was running my my two facilities and doing well, and started getting some buzz, and people started asking me at different masterminds and conferences and stuff like that. So I started like dabbling in the whole like business operations side, and I created a product to help gym owners. And then as I started talking to more of them, and I started sharing more about my journey, I really saw a need. I've had people come up to me in seminars in tears about their finances, and this is something that just interesting. Things are not what they seem. We could look on Facebook and Instagram, and it looks like they have the best facility in the world. There are people that are like well known, even in the industry, that have approached me because they were a wreck financially, and I just realized that, man, this is something that people need, and I tried to fill that need by sharing my experience and helping them, giving them accountability and guidance through some of these steps.
It's funny that the drawback of social media is that we get sucked in to what people want us to see about their life versus what the reality of their lives actually are. And we can make inferences on what we believe a person's life is and how they run their business, and they seem so successful. And the reality on the boots on the ground is completely different. And, this is where ruthless honesty comes into play. And, it's kind of why I'm so kind of blunt. People say, "Oh, you're so blunt." It's like, well, I value the truth. And I also made a decision a long time ago that I was going to tell the truth whenever I could. And I think that people deserve that,
Yeah, absolutely. So like, it's a grind, right? And anybody that tells you it's easy, or it looks like things are perfect, they're not, because we're all human and we all have a lot of things that we're dealing with. And I agree. I think it does nothing but make us feel bad, and we all do it because most of us aren't so quick to post our problems. And I'm not even saying we should,
Right.
But do you think I'm going to post the picture of the session that only has one person in it and it's like pissing me off? Or am I going to post the one with full session, everybody looks happy?
Yeah.
And then,
no, that's exactly right. One of the skills that is missing in business, I think, is the inability to read a financial statement. And this is something that comes up quite often with Robert Kiyosaki. He speaks about the people's inability. He talks about financial literacy in general, and kind of branches off into many different channels of financial literacy. But one of the skills that he really talks about people are missing is the ability to read a profit and loss statement, to know what EBITDA is, and to even look at their balance sheet and to see how much money they actually have, and how to control expenses. Controlling expenses actually is skill. So like getting out of a debt is a skill, but then after you're out of debt, growing your wealth is a skill.
Yeah.
And then when you're in business, managing your unit economics is also a skill. It's one of the things that, one of the reasons why, like in my business with the franchise, the fitness franchise, when we're dealing with franchisees, one of the things that we do is we go over the skill of unit economics, and we help train them and help monitor and, kind of help bring them through that, because not everyone is good at that. Right. So how did you get to the point where you could read financial statements? Was this classes that you went to, seminars, was just a self-study?
Yeah, that's awesome, dude. I want to jump in your economics class. Yeah, so I guess a combination of those things. Like I mentioned, I just developed this passion for it, and I did carry over some of those personal finance skills. And I think one of the reasons why people, they don't know how, they don't do it, is because they overcomplicate it. I think that's a big part of it. And they just like anything else, like how do you learn how to do anything? Like you just start with the basics. So people get really overwhelmed with financial statements, but a financial statement, let's say like you're talking about like a P&L or an income statement, is just looking at a period of time, and it's really looking at the past, right? It's looking at what happened. So what happened in my business this month? What were those expenses? And you mentioned before, like the fixed expenses, like your rent, the variable expenses, like your payroll, and how much were all the expenses? So this is really dumbed down, but I think for starters, this is great, right? You look at it, you look at all of your expenses, and then you look at all of your revenue. So, what categories were they in? Where is it from? I know you have other, I know this is not just a fitness podcast, but in that world, you look at your training revenue, you look at your nutrition revenue, and you look at all these things, and then you have a total, and then you have a difference. All right. And you either have a profit or you have a loss. And it's not just looking at it, but it's like looking at it and saying, what am I going to do now? Because I'm at a loss, right? So that's a major red flag. I need to look at these expenses. I need to look at the income. Am I not charging enough? I mean, there's a lot of decisions. Do I have this employee that I really can't afford, and that's why I'm at a loss? Or am I doing really well? And how do I capitalize on that? This program is doing really well, so let's double down on this. But the only other thing I'll mention. So how did I learn? I think it was just doing it, and it was all of the above that you mentioned. I've actually taken college level accounting courses just because I'm that much of a nerd that I wanted to just dive in a little bit deeper. I don't think that's needed. I don't think you have to do that, but I think it was interesting. But then looking at the future, I think is huge. So whether it's a budget, whether it's a monthly budget or a quarterly budget, and a spending plan, really planning on where that money is going, and being intentional about that, right? So before the month starts, can I do this? Can I give a quick takeaway for people?
Do it.
So I would challenge you all that are listening, and I'd love to hear your feedback, whether you want to reach out to Micah or myself and just let me know. I think this could be transformative for your business, regardless of the business. And I doubt you're doing this. I really do, because I just know so few people do it. Before the month starts, look at every single expense that you have coming up and plan them out. So you could start with the ones that are like recurring, right? They're set. Like maybe your rent is automatically paid, or your electric is automatically paid. Start with those. Maybe it's your softwares that you use. Look at all those, list them out, and then look at whatever else you need, and really try to do it to the dollar. I know your business, I think your podcast is businesses that are over 250K or something like that. And that's a perfect size business to do this with, because it's not that many things, right? You're not buying that many things every day. Maybe you need some printing, or maybe you need some a marketing spend. You're doing Facebook ads, whatever it is. What are you planning on spending? List it all out, and that will be your plan for the month. And then, of course, it's not just doing that, because that's like saying, this is my workout plan, and this is my nutrition plan, but then you have to actually do it. So then as you're spending those items, you track that as well. And then it's like, did you follow the plan that you had, or did you not? And if you did not, why? Was it things that you didn't really need, but you just spent? And if that's the case, you'll want to look at that and address that. Or were they things that you actually did need, but you didn't know you needed them, which is another problem, right? Because now you're not totally in touch with the spending. And it's not to beat yourself up, but it's just to learn from it and say, okay, I have to account for that, because that's something I need. And then there's other steps, but I think just doing that would be absolutely amazing for anybody listening. I think there's going to be so much feedback that you'll be able to get, and your business will improve tremendously from doing that.
That's awesome. So before we wrap, I just want to just ask you a question. So where's the accountability play in that? Like, how does a person who's trying to do that with their business, where do they find accountability if they have a hard time with accountability for themselves?
Man, that's
what
a really good question. Let me give you a couple of different pieces to that. Number one, depending on your business, how it's structured, the size of your business, I think it would be really valuable to include other people. So maybe you have a leadership team that you can meet with before the month starts, and you could plan this out together. Because if you have employees, you want them to buy in, right? Because people, you don't want people that have that attitude that their decisions don't matter, but because they do, right? They're only getting paid based off the idea that the business has profit. So the more that they can be involved, maybe it's very involved and they're like doing it with you if they're on a leadership level, or maybe they are kind of like they're in their own department and then they have their own section of this. Hey, you're the office manager, for example, and I need you to tell me what we need this month. Do we need more paper? Do we need more ink? And that would be a really valuable way to build an accountability, because now you're doing it together as a team. If that's not your situation, or that doesn't work, a couple of other ideas. One would be to just get accountability, just like you would with anything else, right? It could be a coach. It could be, I don't know, your bookkeeper or your accountant, which is, we didn't really talk about that, but that's a whole nother piece. It could be a friend. Like I say, hey, Micah, I'm having trouble tracking my my spending. So I want you to check in with me. Let's check in every week, see how it's going. Check in every week, every day, however you want to do that. Could be text, email, anything you want. And then finally, there's like personal accountability, which I'm a big fan of. And it works for me. I do that with a couple of things that I have trouble sticking with. And all it is it's like that whole, like, don't break the chain thing. Right. So I forgot where I first saw it, but you have like a calendar. And every day that you do, let's say it's spending, for example, every day that I track my spending, I'm going to put an X on that date. So today's August 12th that we're recording. Okay, August 13th, tomorrow, I'm going to check that I did it. And I don't want to break that chain. And there's a lot of science behind that. It's like, you get that endorphin rush from checking it off, and you just don't want to break that chain. You're finding satisfaction through the process of doing it. And I don't always use a calendar. Sometimes now I just use a spreadsheet. So I just put the date and an X on a spreadsheet, and I go in every day and do that. So that's a really good question that you asked, because I think that's probably the missing piece is like, I just don't want to do it. Not everybody's a nerd like me, and they kind of like doing it. Right. So that's a really good question.
Yeah. Having visuals and stuff to go off of are really important. Like, I just think that, I think that's great. Like having a calendar, seeing every day as a link in the chain, and then addressing it like that, I think is tremendous advice. Billy, we're going to have you on again, because we could talk for another 2 hours about this. I know. And there's a lot of things that we didn't get to, but I think that this is a good starting point. And, I think you have a very good way about you to put things simply. And, your story is inspiring, because not everyone kind of comes back from where you came from. And for you to not just come back, but to thrive with your family is a profound example in, personal responsibility and what happens when you kind of focus and hone in on a goal. I mean, I can only imagine how proud your wife is of you, and you are of yourself, like just having kind of gone through this.
Yeah. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate your encouragement. It means a lot. So I really appreciate that. And if you're, those of you that are listening, just stay in front of this stuff. That's another thing I could say. Keep tuning into the podcast, because it gets lonely out there, and it can get discouraging at times. Just don't get so far that you get depressed, or you kind of throw in the towel. And one way to do that is to surround yourself with positive information like this podcast.
That's awesome. So just so you all know, Billy has his own podcast called Your Fitness Money Coach Podcast. And although it says Your Fitness Money Coach, I've been trying to convince Billy to take off the word fitness and just make it say Your Money Coach with Billy, because I think that he has, he's really created for himself a niche and some expertise that kind of transcends just the fitness industry, but you'd have to niche and dial down a little bit today. But he has a lot of good information, whether you are in the fitness industry or not. And I think that you should follow his podcast, Your Fitness Money Coach Podcast. And Billy, where can people contact you if they want to engage with you, maybe get some coaching, and then come up and get your plan? You said you have a resource that they could have?
Yeah. So I have a debt. So if the debt piece spoke to you, I have a debt destroyer, which is the plan that I use for people to get out of debt. I have a spending plan. So I talked about the spending plan a little bit. I have it's kind of like customized, where you just plug and play. So both of those things I'd be happy to share. Awesome. The best place to contact me, I guess, I'll give you a couple of options. The website is yourfitnessmoneycoach.com. There's a form on that website. My email is financialfreedompt@gmail.com. And social media. So for some reason I had it set up as William. So it's either William or Billy Hofacker on Facebook and Instagram. I'm not like super active on those things. I think I shared with Mike, I took them off my phone because I was getting, mad at myself for wasting time. But I definitely check it often enough.
Thank you, William. I have to call you William. So no, those resources, well, the links will at least be in the thing. And if they email you with this email, then they'll be able to, be able to send them those resources that you talked about. Debt destroyer. Right. I think I like that. I like the sound of that. But anyways, Billy, it was an absolute pleasure having you on. We are going to have part 2 of this. Nice. When we talk about the other side, I think, which is kind of the building, kind of dig more deeper, I think, into the building piece, because that's a profound thing. But I was really wanting to my goal today was to really nail down on how a person could go from being in debt to zero. And then eventually we need to kind of move that forward to build wealth. And we've talked about that in this podcast before. We talked about starting businesses or side hustles and things like that, that make sense for a person and their timing, and whether in the job or whether an entrepreneurial, that kind of thing. It's funny that you talked about personality earlier, and I missed this, but I just did a self, without an interview, a podcast about does personality predict success in business? And I kind of break out talking about conscientiousness, conscientiousness trait, and then trait openness, and how those affect a person's decision making in business. And you're right, personality affects what method you choose to develop your own financial literacy.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I used to think that like it's just like everything's like in a box, like you just do it this way, but that's not really the case. And I find that through coaching, right? Everybody's different,
Right.
and they need a different approach. I just came back from the Global Leadership Summit, and one of the speakers, I forgot her name, she's like a Harvard professor. She was talking about the leaders that are are vulnerable, and so much research on that. But vulnerable leaders are they're more likely to find joy in what they do, and they're more likely to be effective with the people they lead. So I thought that was interesting piece to that.
Yeah, that is. No, that's awesome. Yeah, I think that that personality piece plays a big part. And it doesn't really matter, like you said, which piece. It's just do something and do it today.
Exactly.
If you're in severe debt, gotta get it done. Just gotta do it. Yeah. All right, Billy. Well, thank you once again for coming, and we'll follow up with you to see how your success is with the Fitness Money Coach. I'm looking forward to kind of some of your book coming out and reading that and seeing like how you influence the world, and seeing if I can still convince you to get rid of that fitness word in your financial your business, and have you speak to the world across the board. So,
and thanks so much, Mike. I appreciate you and your time as well.
Absolutely. I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.